All right, let's get started with tonight. So good evening. We are so happy to see everyone again today, again, and we are happy to kick off this community talk. And so this series is a part of the Mentorship and Scholars Program of Our Future is Science, and we are also happy to welcome the public as Zoom democratize these programs. So OFIS is an initiative of the Aspen Institute Science and Society Program. And as an organization, we are committed to sparking curiosity, passion, and confidence about them in young people to push science forward in the 21st century and solve society's most pressing issues. And we are generously supported by the Amagen Foundation, the Samueli Foundation, the Burroughs Welcome Fund, 3M, and the Carson Family Charitable Trust. Without these funders, none of this would be possible. And the Community Talk Series is a platform to expose individuals to diverse careers, as well as information, insights, and perspectives on the intersection of STEAM disciplines and social justice. Now to tonight's talk. Our topic tonight will cover the intersection between medicine, public health, and anti-racism. So I will turn it over to one of our OFIS ambassadors, Rachel, who will introduce tonight's first speaker.
Good evening. I extend a warm welcome as well, and I am thrilled to introduce tonight's speaker. Dr. Camara Jones is a family physician, epidemiologist, and past president of the American Public Health Association, whose work focuses on naming, measuring, and addressing the impacts of racism on the health and well-being of our nation and the world. Her allegories on race and racism illuminate topics that are otherwise difficult for many Americans to understand or discuss. That racism exists, racism is a system, racism saps the strength of whole society, and we can act to dismantle racism. Dr. Jones has an amazing resume. She is currently a commissioner on the 3-year O'Neill-Lancet Commission on Racism, Structural Discrimination, and Global Health. She is also an adjunct professor at the Rollins School of Public Health, a senior fellow at the Morehouse School of Medicine, and a visiting professor at King's College London. In addition, Dr. Jones is an elected member of the National Academy of Medicine and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Please ask your questions in the chat, and we will call on you to unmute during our Q&A section after her talk.
Thank you. So is it over to me, Rachel? Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here and to see all of you here. And I'm going to share my own screen and my own slides. So first of all, happy to be here. Our future is science is true. And I'm happy that you guys are all part of this scientific enterprise and part of the chain of us connecting to one another, because we are one big community and nobody is doing anything they're doing by themselves. I entitled what I'm going to share with you today, Still Growing. And it's still growing because, you know, in my career, I have been in medicine, and then I extended it to public health. And now I'm extremely well known as an anti-racism thought leader and activist. So by way of our roadmap for today, I'm going to start out by sharing with you my circuitous, my winding path as I grew up and went through school and have made a lot of different decisions that have fulfilled me and actually followed my passions. I then am going to share with you 2 of the stories that I tell, because now I've become well known for helping to explain complex issues with allegories or cartoon frameworks and the like. So the first story I'm going to tell you, Levels of Health Intervention, a cliff analogy, helps us understand 3 different levels of health intervention and why anti-racism is an important part of anything that we're doing in the health enterprise. The second of the stories, Dual Reality, a restaurant saga, is an image based on something I saw with my own real eyes that will help us understand, if we don't already understand, or communicate to others, if we do already understand, that racism exists. And I hope that you remember at least the outlines of one of these stories so you can share it with family members, with your classmates, with your neighbors and coworkers, everybody. And finally, I'm going to end with a set of 4 habits of mind for social justice warriors, because wherever we find ourselves in life, I'm hoping that all of us will be about social justice. So my circuitous path starts with the fact that I was born in California. Oh, I should say the first thing is, you will forgive me, but I am in London, England right now, in the United Kingdom, and it's 5 hours later than Eastern time, and I know you guys are from all over the country. So anyway, it is 1 o'clock in the morning for me here. I'm really delighted to be with you, but if I seem a little woozy or something like that, it's because of the time and the time difference. Anyway, I was born in California, but I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, the oldest of 3 girls. In fact, my 2 sisters are twins to each other, just 1 year younger than I am. So we grew up like triplets. And my mother had wanted to be a doctor, but she was told at that time that women weren't doctors. Now it's interesting that the majority of applicants and people in medical schools are actually female. My father was a doctor. He was very laid back and stuff like that. He really enjoyed his work. So he gave me the example that you could enjoy being a doctor. They never said, you will be doctors, but I have to tell you, there was some subtle messaging going on because all 3 of us, my sisters and I, have become doctors. I went to college at Wellesley College in Wellesley, Massachusetts, which is a women's college. And there I got my Bachelor of Arts degree in molecular biology. I also, and I was pre-med, so I did all the pre-med courses. I applied to medical schools, but also when I was a senior, I applied to a fellowship program called the Luce Scholars Program, and I was selected to be one of 15 future American leaders who would be able to spend a year in an Asian country. You could be as young as just graduated from college or as old as 30, and they would put you in a place where if you were a lawyer, for example, you could be with a law firm in Hong Kong. If you were an actor, maybe you could be with a puppet theater in Indonesia. And I was only pre-med. I was one of the youngest ones in our cohort. So I was sent to the Philippines and spent a year in Dumaguete City in Negros Oriental, one of the central islands of the Philippines, working with a member of a rural development team that included a doctor who was training local health workers. It included a nutritionist who was helping families plant backyard gardens so they could have fresh fruits and vegetables. These were very poor rural areas, 2 rural barrios. And it included an agriculturist who was helping the farmers terrace their land on this very hilly hillside, because if they didn't terrace the land, if they didn't dig into the earth and make it flat again like steps going up the mountainside, then when they put fertilizer on and the rain came, it would just wash all of their hard-earned fertilizer to the sea. I didn't have any skills except being pre-med, but I was young, so I organized youth for service groups among the young people in these 2 barrios who weren't organized. I recognized that if they had a lot of time on their hands, but they weren't organized like their parents were. And then we started planting these miracle trees up and down the mountains, trees that helped hold the soil because they grew quickly and their roots dug in, trees that if you cut them down and used it for firewood, they would grow right back. The cows could eat the leaves. You could take the seed pods and make jewelry, and it was just a lovely thing. And we also had parties that brought the communities together. After doing that, I had deferred admission at 2 medical schools, at the Harvard MIT Health Sciences and Technology program and at Stanford Medical School. Oh, I'll say I also traveled while I was in the Philippines to Hong Kong, Indonesia, Singapore, and Thailand. And you'll see as I talk about my circuitous path, I mentioned some of the places that I traveled during those parts of my life. Right, but I was pre-med and I chose to go to medical school at Stanford, which is in Palo Alto, California. Now it's called Stanford, California. I guess Stanford just got so big, it just took over, right? And that's where I did my medical degree. I traveled at that time as a medical student for a summer in Venezuela, a summer in the United Kingdom. And because of my experience in the Philippines, where I learned that interventions like building roads, right, or planting backyard gardens could have more health impact than say, just talking to a patient or prescribing medications, or even spending the last 2 months of a person's life in the intensive care unit, that the investments in education or public health things or the environment could have more health impacts. I yearned for public health even as I was studying medicine. So I decided in my 4th year of medicine, I didn't know what kind of clinical residency I wanted to do. So I didn't even apply in the match, but instead I applied to schools of public health. Actually, only one. I only applied to one school, Johns Hopkins. And I was accepted there, but I was accepted not just in their Master of Public Health program, but also in their General Preventive Medicine residency. So that's a 2-year program. The first year is the Master of Public Health. The second year you do rotations in health departments or kind of public health preventive medicine clinics and the like. And that's also when I started my coursework for the PhD. But it's expected, if you're general preventive medicine resident, that you do some clinical work. At the time when they accepted me, they said, do you promise you'll go into a clinical residency at some point? And I said, yes. And by this time, I had found, I traveled in Liberia and Cote d'Ivoire and Ivory Coast, but I had found my kind of doctors, social medicine doctors who understood that organizing tenant groups was just as important a medical intervention as talking to a patient or prescribing medications. So I put my PhD on leave. I went on leave of absence. I did my first level of exams, my oral exams, and then I was on leave. And I went to do the residency program in social medicine in New York City at Montefiore Hospital in the Bronx. As a family medicine resident, I was also in this bigger program that had 4 social pediatric residents, 6 family medicine residents, 8 social medicine residents. And while I was there, I started asking questions. And this is one of the things that is going to be important for you in your whole career, not just to ask questions in the short term, but ask deep questions. Always be asking questions. Always be asking why. And then when you get the answer, ask why again and why again. So I was asking, why is it that we have been trained as medical students and as young physicians, residents, to routinely include the so-called race of a patient in the chief complaint, in that telegraphic message that we share with one another when one doctor or nurse or other health professional is speaking to another? And I wondered about that because it could be problematic. Because if I am sending you a picture of the patient by saying that this 18-year-old Black female presents in the emergency department with kind of lower abdominal pain, and you see my picture, like how is that distinguishing her from the 18-year-old white female who presents in the emergency department with lower abdominal pain? And how might we rush to the room differently? How might we think about what might be happening with that person differently? And how does that adversely impact the care of at least one or maybe both of those patients? So I got lots of answers to that. The most not serious, but probably true answer is, oh, well, it helps us identify the patient in the emergency department. But really it boiled down to the fact that a lot of the information that we were taught as medical students was treating race as if it were a biological risk factor. So hold on to that thought, because I will tell you right now, race is not biology, right? But I'm going to carry on with my circuitous path and how I went from medicine to public health to anti-racism. At that same time, I found my husband. He was in the social peds track, so I married Herbert Singleton. And because we got married and he was doing a payback commitment, then I wasn't able to go right back after I finished residency the year after he finished. I couldn't go right back to Hopkins to finish my dissertation because he had a commitment in New York. So I accepted a role as a visiting assistant professor in New York City at the City University of New York Medical School. I taught some courses there, US healthcare systems, issues in health policy, community-oriented primary care. I actually got an award, the the Best Teacher Award that year. It was there for 1 year, but I recognized that it was going to be difficult for me to finish my dissertation. I thought I would teach and be doing my dissertation work, and that was just a lot. So I preceded my husband down to Baltimore and went back to the School of Hygiene and Public Health, where I did complete my PhD in epidemiology over a number of years. My dissertation, Methods for Comparing Distributions, Development and Application, Exploring Race-Associated Differences in Systolic Blood Pressure. You can ask me about that. But the long and short of it was, I didn't accept that what we see in terms of differences in percent of people who have high blood pressure, or the average blood pressures comparing different populations by so-called race, that had a biological basis. Some people have been talking about salt handling of the kidneys and this, that, and the other. And so I was investigating, looking at full distributions of blood pressure, Black and white blood pressure distributions across 40 years of surveys done in the United States. And I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about that and what I found. I also, because I was doing a teaching assistant there at Hopkins, I had come back, now I'm, a doctoral student. Some of my students, some of the Master of Public Health students, especially those who were coming from the African continent or the European continent, because the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health is very international, were asking me, why is it here that you always present your tables of data by Black, white, other? That was so long ago that those were the categories that we used. And that's a good question. The question is, I had asked before, why are we presenting race of a patient doctor to doctor? And now, and it boiled down to, well, that's the data, that's the best data that we have. And now I'm getting to the people who create those data, the public health people who are doing the research. And then people from outside the US were like, well, why are you just presenting it Black, white, other? And then you don't even try to explain those differences by race. So that got me along the line of, what are we actually measuring when we measure the variable race? And the quick answer is, it's a rough proxy for social class. It's measuring social class in some kind of way, but any kind of way. The only way that it's even associated with social class is because of racism and how we have residential segregation. We can get into some of this later, but that people are segregated by race into different neighborhoods, which allows the resources, the cleanness of the environment, the quality of the schools, the availability of fresh fruits and vegetables to also be segregated by race. And so social class differences by race don't just so happen. And it's also true that although, for example, Black people are overrepresented in poverty, while white people are overrepresented in wealth, that is true in this country. It's not true that all Black people are poor. And it's actually true that it used to be the majority of poor people were white. Now it's the plurality, more than of all the groups, the biggest group that is poor is still white. So it's not a one-to-one relationship. So race is not measuring social class exactly. In the same way, it's not measuring culture exactly. It's a worse proxy, if you will, for culture. It certainly is not measuring genes, because we have mapped the human genome, and we know that there is no basis in our human genome for racial subspecies. So if it's a poor proxy for social class, poorer for culture, meaningless for genes, but such a good predictor of health outcomes across centuries in this country, across diseases, across age groups and all. Why is it such a good predictor? It's because it's measuring the social classification of people in a race-conscious society. It's measuring the impacts of racism. It's measuring how we are treated differently and how our environments differ because of racism. I also, while I was a student there, had my daughter Taylor, she was born. And then my first job after all this training, residency in general preventive medicine, residency in family medicine, Master of Public Health, PhD, medical degree, all of this, my first real job was at the Harvard School of Public Health. I'm going to just really go quickly now because I don't have much time. I was an assistant professor in two departments, the Department of Health and Social Behavior and the Department of Epidemiology. And I actually developed the first course there on race and racism. This is way back in the 90s. 1994 to 2000 was when I was at the Harvard School of Public Health. I also taught other courses. I spent 8 months in New Zealand with my family and my two children, traveled to Austria and the like. My son Malcolm was born while I was an assistant professor at the Harvard School of Public Health. He actually turned 3 in New Zealand, and my daughter turned 9. Then I was recruited from academia, from the Harvard School of Public Health to the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, in Atlanta, where I was a medical officer and research director on social determinants of health. And among the many things I did in my 14 and a half years there was organize the CDC Racism and Health Work Group as an official CDC scientific work group. And we were doing all kinds. I was the only one in all of CDC who had the word racism in my job description. But there were a lot of people who outside of their like paid jobs that they were supposed to do were interested in looking at the impacts of racism on health. And so we had 300 people on our listserv, about half at CDC, half from everywhere else around the country and the world, and we were doing a lot of good work. I also at that time attached myself to two academic institutions, Morehouse School of Medicine and the Rollins School of Public Health at Emory that were right there, traveled to other places, Australia and Brazil. Toward the end of my time there, I moved to a different part of CDC and they were not interested in, they didn't think CDC should be dealing with racism at all, but certainly not in their part. And so they made it quite difficult for me. And then I moved over to the Morehouse School of Medicine more permanently. I was a senior fellow and adjunct associate professor. I taught community health, traveled to Cuba, Rwanda during that time. And then I was elected president of the American Public Health Association, the health association that represents 25,000 public health workers across from the tippy top, professors to the people, deeply, deeply in communities and all kinds of public health folks. 25,000 members at the national level, another 25,000 members in our state public health associations. I launched a national campaign against racism as my presidential initiative, if you will. I took full advantage of having a platform and I used it up. I traveled in that role throughout the United States. By this time, I have been to all but North Dakota and South Dakota as states in the US. I traveled to Canada, Puerto Rico, Switzerland, Taiwan as president of APHA, and also outside of that to Tanzania. Then I'm at this part of my career now where I describe it as rent a scholar. So I'm still adjunct in my locations, in Atlanta. So Morehouse School of Medicine, the Rollins School of Public Health. But I spent a year at Radcliffe as a Radcliffe Fellow at the Harvard University. I spent 6 months as a presidential fellow. And now this is getting into the time of COVID. So some of it was virtual at Yale School of Medicine. I spent a year as a presidential chair at the University of California, San Francisco. I spent a year most recently as a Lieberhume visiting professor at King's College, London. And I am currently doing a lot of advising and on advisory committees and stuff like that. And I'm on the 3-year O'Neill-Lancet Commission on Racism, Structural Discrimination, and Global Health. What are the lessons that you're supposed to get from all of that? The first lesson is there is no way that any of you guys, I don't care if you're a high school student or you're in college now or you're a medical student or you're even beyond that, there's really no way that you can know what you will be doing 20 years from now. You can chunk it out in 3-year time frame, 4 years, 5 years. You can say, okay, I'm going to go to college. So that's going to be 4 years, more or less, right? And you can do that. And then you can apply, say, okay, well, I'm going to apply to medical school or nursing school, or I'm going to be a PhD, or I'm going to, do engineering or whatever. And you can throw out lots of seeds and you can see which ones sprout. And then you use your passions to direct your path. My path was not straight. I didn't do MD, PhD, like some people do these days. I didn't even do an MD, MPH. I did each thing separately. And each time I was sort of being guided by what I wanted to do. Now, it doesn't mean that I was flaky. When I decided to do something, I finished that thing. Even though in medical school, I was yearning for public health, I finished medical school. And I say that you should finish what you start unless it makes you feel like you want to hurt yourself, then you should let it go. But if you can, even if you decide halfway through a thing that you think, oh, maybe I'm really interested in something else, finish that thing, because everything you do in your life is going to help you. It's going to add to who you are, what you know, your knowledge. And also you won't be seen as a quitter or flaky or something like that. But do follow your passions. And you might go here, and then you go think, and then the next time you go think, 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 think. But you will always be building you. And it might be that what you're doing 20 years from now doesn't even exist because you're going to create it. The second thing is to embrace challenge. And I say this, like, even if somebody asks you to do a talk or to introduce the speaker, within, our future is science or whatever, and you feel like, oh, I feel a little nervous about that. But you should say yes. When people give you opportunities and it makes you feel a little nervous, say yes, because they wouldn't have asked you to do the thing if they didn't know you would be successful. And when you succeed, you will learn something more about your power and your ability, and it will give you more confidence going forward. So embrace challenges. The only thing you don't want to embrace is somebody says, jump off a cliff or try these drugs or something. You don't want to do that kind of thing that makes you nervous. But things that you're not sure if you can do it or not, yes, you can. The third thing is always be looking ahead to identify opportunities or to create opportunities. So it used to be in the old days that we had to look at bulletin boards. Now you just have to look online and all, but be looking ahead to see what else is out there, what kinds of fellowship programs, summer programs, and the like. What else is out there? And obviously you guys have been doing some of that because you're hooked up with this program right now, which is an excellent one. Finally, reach back to help others and to guide them. And again, this program is an example of how you can do that. So now I see that my time is over. I spent all of that time on my circuitous path. May I just spend a few more minutes just with the content I wanted to share with students? May I have 10 more minutes perhaps on that? Or are you so overwhelmed with questions that you want to go here now?
I
Keep
think it
going.
would be good if you did your story. I think
Okay,
continue.
okay. Okay, I'll continue. So this image is a story, an image, a cartoon animation that I share with people who are interested in health. So maybe they're pre-meds or medical students, or maybe they are the hospital administrators or whatever, to help them understand different levels of health intervention. So here we go. Whoops. Boom. Somebody just fell off of the cliff of good health. And if that were you or somebody in your family, you would be delighted to find an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff to speed you on to care. But if you were concerned, if all of us were concerned about other people who might come along that cliff face, that is, if we were concerned about population health or community health or public health, we might well ask ourselves, what could we put in place as a health intervention besides just putting a lot of ambulances at the bottom of the cliff? So one of you guys is going to say, I know, let's put a net halfway down. That way, even if people fall, we can catch them before they get crunched up at the bottom. And that's a really, really good idea. Although, of course, nets have holes in them, so some people might fall through the cracks. But we can even make that a trampoline halfway down. No holes in a trampoline. But even with a trampoline halfway down that cliff, we might well find ourselves with lots of people just bouncing up and down at half functionality, not able to get back to the top of the cliff. So what else could we put in place as a health intervention? Well, clearly we need to be thinking about putting a fence at the edge of the cliff to keep people from falling in the first place. But even with that fence, that's going to have to be a very, very strong fence if there's a lot of population pressure against it. So what else could we do as a health intervention? Well, we could move the population away from the edge of the cliff. So let me label these interventions that we are looking at so far, where the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff represents acute medical care, so going to the clinic or the hospital, as well as what we on the public health side of things describe as tertiary prevention. So we talk about 3 levels of prevention: primary, secondary, and tertiary, where tertiary prevention is preventing complications from diseases that have already shown up. So preventing amputations from diabetes and the like. So that's the ambulance. The net or trampoline halfway down, these are our safety net programs, which are often in our social services, right? As well as secondary prevention, which is early detection. So all of our screening programs, breast cancer screening, prostate cancer screening, all of that kind of stuff represents the safety net, the secondary prevention. The fence represents primary prevention, keeping bad things from happening in the first place. So this is like immunizations or information about the harms of drug use and smoking, or even tobacco 21 policies, laws in different states preventing easy access of young people to tobacco products. Moving the population away from the edge of the cliff is what people describe as addressing the social determinants of health. Those root causes of health, those determinants of health that are outside of the individual, beyond our individual genes and beyond our individual behaviors. So they include our individual context, so our education, our jobs, our income, our wealth. So clearly, one way to move the population away from the edge of the cliff is to address poverty, give people a living wage or whatever. It also includes neighborhood context. So are there fresh fruits and vegetables available? How clean is the water? How clean is the air? How good are the schools in terms of education and the like? So addressing adverse neighborhood conditions is another way of moving the population away from the edge of the cliff. I could go on and on about this cliff analogy, but just to say that we recognize with any kind of outcome, like even with infant mortality, which is the numbers of babies that die before their first birthday, if we were trying to intervene, well, the ambulance might be our neonatal intensive care units for the youngest babies born too early. The net or trampoline might be prenatal care, screening pregnant women to see if they have problems that you can get a handle on early. The fence might represent our WIC programs for excellent maternal nutrition for pregnant women. Moving the population away from the edge of the cliff might be a living wage or excellent educational programs so that young girls didn't feel like their main option was to have a baby too soon. This could be a useful diagram. We could go into a community and say, how should we be spending our health resources? How much on ambulances versus nets versus fences versus moving the population away from the edge of the cliff? But just to say, as useful as this diagram is, it has a huge fatal flaw. And the huge fatal flaw is that, as I presented it so far, it doesn't help us understand how health disparities show up, how the differences in the numbers of our mothers dying pregnancy-related births by race, how does that happen? How does it happen that, in terms of the differences in high blood pressure or the differences in people, the percent of people in different groups with diabetes and the like, how does that happen? So I want you to hold the cliff in the back of your mind for a minute. We'll just quickly say that these disparities arise on 3 levels. There are differences in the quality of care received within the healthcare system. You can ask me about that, but very well documented. But, health is not everybody even gets within the system, right? So there's differences once you're in the system and the quality of care, but there's even differences in terms of accessing the system. Some people can't get to, primary care, and their main thing that they can get to is emergency care, which is a little bit too little, too late. But then even the system things, the health system is not the whole story because health is not created within the health sector. So there are differences in our life opportunities, in our exposures to toxins and dangers and risk and infections and stuff like that, that make some individuals and communities sicker than others in the first place. So there are 3 levels at which health disparities arise: differences in quality of care, differences in access to care, differences in underlying exposures and opportunities. And if you were to draw their impact, the huge base of a pyramid, not even of a pyramid, the huge hidden base of an iceberg are the differences in the conditions of our lives. And then often the people who have been made sicker by bad life conditions are often frustrated and have limited access to the healthcare system. And then sometimes even the lucky ones who get into the system are further injured because of differences in quality of care. So now thinking about those three levels at which health disparities arise, we're going to go back to the cliff. But now we're going to recognize that we're not dealing with a flat two-dimensional cliff. We're actually dealing with a three-dimensional cliff. And at some parts of the cliff, there might be an ambulance there, but it's slow or goes off in the wrong direction. Or maybe it has a flat tire, right? So maybe there's an ambulance there, but it has a flat tire, so it's slow or goes off in the wrong direction. Or maybe there's no ambulance there at all. And maybe there's no net at that part of the cliff, and maybe there's no fence. And usually at those parts of the cliff, the population is being pushed closer to the edge. So let's label these observations about the three-dimensional cliff with how health disparities arise, where the differences in quality of care are represented when there's an ambulance there, but it's slow or goes off in the wrong direction. Differences in access to care are no ambulance, no net, no fence. And differences in underlying exposures and opportunities are represented by the closer proximity of that greeny population to the edge. So now that we recognize that we're really dealing with a three-dimensional cliff, there's a whole new set of questions that arise. The first is, how did the cliff become three-dimensional? And that's usually because of historical injustices that are perpetuated year after year, decade after decade, century after century by present-day contemporary structural factors in our laws, in our policies, in the built environment and the like. But given that there's a three-dimensional cliff, we also need to ask, why are the nets, ambulances, fences, why are these resources differentially distributed along that cliff face? And why are the different populations found at different parts of the cliff? Why are the oranges back here and away and the greenies being pushed closer to the edge? And when you start asking those kinds of questions, you're now asking not about addressing the social determinants of health, like poverty, bad housing, bad neighborhood conditions, and the like, moving the population away from the edge of the cliff. We're now talking about addressing the social determinants of equity, which are systems of power that can differentially distribute resources and populations. And those include racism, sexism, heterosexism, and other systems of structured inequity. So really with this cliff, I have distilled, if you will, three different dimensions of health intervention. If we're trying to do something about people falling off the edge of the cliff of good health, the first dimension, which you can display along a line, are our health services, the ambulance, net, fence along the edge of the cliff. The second dimension, which you can show in a flat plane, 2 dimensions, is moving the population away from the edge of the cliff, addressing the social determinants of health. You have to do that if you want to have large and sustained improvements of health outcomes, because even, let me just go back to the first dimension, these health services. In the US, we don't even have universal access to high quality healthcare like they do in London, where I am right now, and in many, many countries around the world. But even when we get universal access to high quality healthcare, that in and of itself is not going to result in large and sustained improvements in health outcomes, because it is the way that you value all individuals equally in your society to give everybody access to healthcare. But you can overwhelm any system if everybody's pushed up against the edge. So we have to move the population away from the edge of the cliff, address the social determinants of health, the conditions of lives outside of our individual genes, outside of our individual behaviors, if we're going to have large and sustained improvements in health outcomes. But the trick is this: if we're about moving the population away from the edge of the cliff without recognizing that we're really dealing with a three-dimensional cliff, we're at risk of moving some of the population, but not all of the population, and actually making health disparities worse. So we must acknowledge and address the three-dimensionality of the cliff. We need to address these social determinants of equity or inequity, including racism, sexism, and the like, if we're going to achieve social justice and eliminate health disparities. That's it there. I want to take some questions now, but I really, and I'm sorry that I put so much in here and only had a little bit of time, but let's take some questions now. But if I could depending on how the questions are, I would love to share the other stories. Oh, you guys can guide me. Ebony, Jelana, Hassan, you guys can guide me.
Thank you, Dr. Jones, for laying the foundation for the students' exploration into medicine, public health, and anti-racism. And as Dr. Jones said, we're now ready to for our Q&A. We'll start with questions in the chat, but feel free to raise your hand or use the hand raising reaction in Zoom to ask your question. I see that the mentee Mildred asked a question. Mildred, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Thank you so much. My question is, can you share some ways by which you can draw motivation to finish what you started, even though situations are not encouraging? Thank you.
So you mean along your path as you're going along?
Yes, I'm a graduate student, and like I started something like I started a program and I haven't finished. Yeah, so I'm just inquisitive. Yeah.
So the first thing is, if you have people around you who are on the same path with you, who are in the same program or related programs, to just know that you're not alone in trying to get through all of this, all of the hurdles that they put in front of you in these programs. Some of the hurdles are necessary and some of them are unnecessary. But if you are not doing it alone, then it becomes easier to help each other out. And I think of it this way, you know, when you see geese flying in a V formation up in the sky, they're flying either north or south, depending on the season. The reason that they fly that way is because the goose at the front is breaking the wind for the geese who are behind, breaking the wind for the geese who are behind, and so forth, right? And so I used to worry about the goose at the front, like what happens when she gets tired? Maybe you're tired, right? What happens with her? Does that goose that's been in the lead all this time, did they just fall to the ground or fly off someplace random? No, they pull back and another goose takes the lead. So what we need to do in anything that we're trying to get through is to identify our flock or create a flock, decide in what direction we're going. We're all trying to finish this graduate program, or we're all trying to do whatever, and then take turns in leadership and in helping one another. There's an African proverb, I'm sorry, I don't know from what region or what country, but it's, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And it's like always working with others, being part of a collective is always going to help you get through. Mildred, did that help?
Sure, it did. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Good luck.
Thank you.
And also know that if you feel miserable right now, that won't last long, and that once you finish that program, it's going to set you up for many, many options, and you don't have to stay in a straight line and keep doing the thing about that program that you don't like. You finish the program, you use the knowledge you get and the contacts you get and everything for what they are, and then you figure out your next path, your next step in the path.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
That was a wonderful response. And I feel like that can be applied to all kinds of students, regardless of if they're in a graduate or undergraduate program. I see that Megan has also asked a question in the chat. So Megan, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
And then I also see Sophia has her hand up. You got it, so you guys have it.
Hi,
Megan.
yeah, it's wonderful talk. I am just so impressed by you. I was just wondering if like what you've talked about is commonly taught in medical schools today, or if there's like an initiative to bring this like into training. And then a second part to my question, my husband is currently in medical school, about to go into his rotations. And he's been listening in. So he was just wondering like if there's like what are some practical things that he can do like going into clinic, like yeah.
Okay, so so actually my cliff analogy, if you guys wanted to even share it with other people, I did a quick 5-minute video with the Urban Institute. It's a what do you call it, a whiteboard video. So it's my voice and it's my story and all, but a whiteboard video. And some people are using those in medical schools. I will tell you that I'm really sorry that I put too much in, because my real power is not even in that story. It's in my allegories about race and racism that I know I'm not going to have time to deal with. But I will tell you all that people are teaching the Gardener's Tale. It's a 4-page paper, and I hope that the program that, you know, Our Future is Science can actually send out to you all just the 4-page paper, 2 pages front and back, the Gardener's Tale, to read that. Also, I'll send some links to a video of me telling the Gardener's Tale. If you Google my name and TED Talk, then I did a TEDx Emory that has 4 of my allegories, and those are very powerful. And some of those are being taught in medical schools and law schools and in, you know, public health schools and the like. So they're so old. The Gardener's Tale is 25 years old now, so older than you guys, older than many of you guys that are on this. And so those resources are now available. And you said for your husband, I forgot what he wanted. I'm sorry. Oh, what can he do?
He's about to go into his rotations in medical school.
Oh, yeah.
But just like
the main
general practical, yeah.
The main thing is to treat every patient like they're a member of your family. I hope you love your family, but like have the respect for every patient and really love your patients like you would love a member of your family, and listen to them and have that respect, and be diligent. Don't just glance over their chart, really read their history, really listen to them. If you as a physician in training, and all of us in whatever we're doing, if we can respect people and see their full humanity and honor their full humanity, then all of our work will be much better. And if we can understand that every person walking on this earth has something to teach us. I mean, it's not their job to teach us things, but everybody has something that they know that we don't know. And so we should walk in wonder when we meet people, even when we meet them in a power dynamic of doctor and patient.
Thank you.
Sophia, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yes. So, hello, Dr. Jones. I'm a mentee and I'm a junior this year. I just wanted to say that you are definitely my role model. Like, you were listing all of my dream schools that are just like under your belt, and it's amazing. So I'm actually really interested in traveling in my future career as well. You were talking about going to all of these amazing places, and I'm just curious about the logistics behind it. So, how are you able to travel so much? Did the various like amazing positions that you hold provide a stipend for you to travel? And at what point were you able to like actually start getting a steady income and not just like, you know, doing residency and that kind of stuff?
Oh, yeah. Well, so in terms of the travels, all of my travel was it wasn't like me taking vacations. I don't even know how to take a vacation. So always I was there in a role, embedded, because I don't like to just visit. You know, I like to learn languages and have a reason to be there. So the first thing in the Philippines, when I did travel with the Philippines, I was traveling to get back to our closing program. So I spent a month in Indonesia, coming from the Philippines, and then up through Singapore, and our closing program was in Thailand. But it was all in the context of the loose scholars. I went to Venezuela through Stanford Medical School. They had a program there, and also to the UK through Stanford Medical School. So this is part, in all of these things, you know, a colleague at the Harvard School of Public Health told me about this, the Ian Axford Fellowship in New Zealand, where I was with the Ministry of Health there for 8 months and looking at Maori health. So I listen to find out, I look and I listen to opportunities, and I'm quite open to travel. I never ask, oh, why would I want to go there? I'm more about, oh, let me learn something new. And whenever you break through your bubble of experience and you experience our common humanity across town or in another country or whatever, it's an exciting thing. But I was never like saving up to travel. I was always exploring travel opportunities available within my context. I can't remember the second part of your question. It's 1 o'clock here. Now it's almost 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm sorry.
No worries, no worries. I was just asking if like the amazing positions that you were holding like provide a stipend for you to travel, and then at what point were you able to maintain like a steady income, like after you went through residency and then you finally landed your job at Harvard.
So you're working, so residency is a job, and now residents get paid, like, I think when we were working, it was like $20,000 or $30,000. So like residents get real money now, but of course, the cost of living has gone up. But so you get paid if you're in medicine once you're a resident, and so all of these other things. But my first real job that wasn't in a training context was when I was at the Harvard School of Public Health. But even that wasn't a lot of money for an assistant professor. I've never been doing this for money. I mean, the first time I made what I would call real money was actually after all of that, after being president of the American Public Health Association. With the brutal murder of Mr. George Floyd, all of a sudden people were interested in the work that I had been doing for decades in terms of racism. And then I started getting paid to do talks. And now, of course, that's all bets are off with that. But I mean, there was like 1 year or maybe 2 years, 3-year stretch where I was paid. But it was because of the work I've been doing for decades. So it's not even like the newcomers on the block. Oh, people want to say the word racism now. You know, I mean, I'm glad for everybody who's doing that work, but a lot of people were just kind of seeming a little opportunistic or something. Or not even recognizing those who had come before them and like taking some of my stuff, or, you know, and just using it. So don't be one of those people. Just do your work. And if you live long enough, then there'll be a time when your work can shine, and you can. But even if it doesn't shine, if you are doing what you love, then that's the reward. And it's not about money or any of that. It's if you find your passion work, that's good. And some people find it sooner than others. But if you keep being guided not by what people tell you you should be doing, and not by scheming, but you throw out opportunities, and then say you throw out 10 seeds, 3 of them sprout, and then you're like, oh, which one do I want now? And you go to that, then you'll create your own path that will give you a lot of satisfaction. May I just, I'm looking at the time, and I know you guys want to close, but may I just share my slides at the very end? You know, so I won't be able to tell you the stories, but I would like it, with permission of the people, just like for 3 minutes. Is that all right? Okay. So I'm going to go back to the presentation. What I didn't tell you, so I'm just going to say is, I'm going to run very quickly, that when I was president of APHA, I launched a national campaign against racism with 3 tasks: to name racism, because you have to name a problem in order to get started on the solution. But you have to move to action. You need to ask, how is racism operating here? And then organize and strategize to act around something that you can get your hands on. That there are 4 key messages when naming racism: that racism exists, racism is a system, racism saps the strength of the whole society, and we can act to dismantle racism. I was going to tell you my dual reality restaurant saga, but you can get a sense of that from, if you look at the TED Talk, okay? So Google, or you guys just send them the link for my TED Talk, I'll send it to you. I was defining racism as a system of structuring opportunity and assigning value based on the social interpretation of how one looks, which is what we call race, that has 3 impacts. Unfairly disadvantages some, but all unfair disadvantages have their reciprocal unfair advantages. So unfairly advantages others, but whether individuals and communities are unfairly disadvantaged or unfairly advantaged, racism saps the strength of the whole society through the waste of human resources. And then this is what I wanted to come to, but you won't even understand this. So anyway, this is about the tension between those who value comfort and those who value social justice. You would have had to have heard the whole story to know this. But the part that I'm asking permission to share with you are habits of mind for social justice warriors. So I call these things the 4 BCs: be courageous, be curious, be collective, and build community. So when I say be courageous, I mean speak your truth always. Be unafraid of controversy. And if you're in a meeting or you're in a classroom or whatever, I know it's getting really scary out there right now. I know it is. And so don't be crazy. But I would say speak your truth and be unafraid to say the thing that needs to be said. Embrace challenge, as I said before, and know that for all of us, the edge of our comfort is actually our growing edge. So we should not shrink from discomfort, but we should lean in to that discomfort. And if the leaning in means that we have to read more, read history, go across town and stay a while, speak to strangers or whatever, the edge of our comfort is our growing edge. So be courageous. The second of the 4 BCs, be curious, is to ask why. And then when you get that answer, ask why again, and then ask why again, and ask these serial whys, so that you're not ever satisfied with superficial explanations, but you identify deep root causes of things, whatever it is you're doing. To read widely, and especially read history, to stay woke, what's going on here, and walk in wonder at what other people have to teach you, to learn more than one language for sure, and to travel as much as you can, especially across town, which many of us neglect, as well as around the world. Because in our bubbles of experience, all of us is in some kind of bubble of experience. Most of us do not know, don't recognize that just across town, there are people who are just as kind, just as funny, just as generous, just as hardworking, just as smart as we are, who are living in very different circumstances. So we need to create opportunities for ourselves as individuals, and for, if you're parts of institutions, for groups, to do bubble bursting, to experience our common humanity on the other side of town, so that we can start building common cause. So that was be curious. The third one, be collective, means to care about the whole. So share your ideas, your time, your energy, your stuff with others. Recognize yourself as a global citizen. Never be confined to what people are trying to tell you are within a given context. And organize, always, because collective action, we have individual power, but collective action amplifies our individual power. Collective action informs us, inspires us, propels us, protects us. The geese. So that's be collective. And finally, build community. So be interested in the stories of others, believe the stories of others, and then join in the stories of others. So if you're interested in the stories of others, talk to strangers in your classrooms, on the bus, wherever you are. Create bubble bursting opportunities so that you can believe the struggles of others because you experience that. Speak up and take action on behalf of others. That's how you join in the stories of others, and go across town and stay a while. So this is how you could reach me. This is how you can reference this talk. Sorry that I wasn't able to share the second story, and it's, I tried to do too much, or I talked too long about my past. But anyway, thank you all. And I don't know if there's time for any other questions. I see it's 1 minute after the hour.
Thank you so much. I believe there's time for one more question. Anthony, in the chat, he asked a question. So Anthony, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you so much for that really wonderful talk. I feel like you are already starting to discuss some of these little bit of my question, but my question was, given the way that this work intersects multiple societal spheres, whether that's political, economic, and community, what are steps, whether small or large, you would suggest emerging professionals currently in the United States at the moment to help resolve these issues? I'm a 5th-year PhD student, so I'm about to go on to the job market at the moment, and a lot of my work intersects the both biological aspects, but also the socioeconomic, social justice portions of improving the society around us. So I would love to hear your input on that.
Right. And so, and there's a lot of stifling of the realities. There's a lot of some bad stuff going on in terms of acknowledging the problems that exist and trying to stop solutions. And so, first of all, I would say, remember those 4 BCs. Be courageous, be curious, be collective, build community. But also, if there's ever a time that you need to call the work that you're doing something different, like maybe, I have a definition of health equity, assurance of the conditions for optimal health for all people. Maybe I don't need to call it health equity anymore. Maybe I need to call it our shared values, right? Or I have principles for achieving health equity. which are value all individuals and populations equally, recognize and rectify historical injustices, provide resources according to need. So maybe I don't need to call those principles for achieving health equity. Maybe I'll call them principles for achieving our shared goals, right? So sometimes you have to keep doing the same work, take the same strategies, but call it something different. But when you're describing the problem, like racism, I think we have to stay naming the problem, because you have to name a problem in order to get started on the solution. You can do the work without advertising. You can call your work washing dishes and still be about valuing all individuals and populations equally, recognizing and rectifying historical injustices, and providing resources according to need. You can be doing that work, right? You don't have to advertise that work with a title that people are trying to ban or whatever, but you cannot not name the problem. You must name the problem, because if you don't name the problem, you will have no traction for getting started on a solution. So that's sort of my orientation right now about things. And I don't know if you were talking about in that political context or not. So I hope, did I address some of your
Yes,
questions?
you definitely did. No, that was wonderful. Thank you so much.
So these were some great questions, everyone. Thank you for getting involved. I will now pass it on to Ebony to close out our community talk.
So we know so many of you are interested in health disparities, and we are so grateful to you, Dr. Camara Jones, for spending this evening with us to help you start understanding this complex topic. So to our audience, can you extend your appreciation to our speaker in the chat? And thank you all for attending this community talk. Please visit our website, ourfutureisscience.org, and follow us on social media to learn about our initiative, future events, and our campaign. Mentees and mentors, the only announcement we have for you is that we are moving the capstone feedback session by output to February 27th. And next week, we will host a professional development workshop on science communication. We've sent you a confirmation email this morning, so make sure to add it to your calendars. Dr. Jones, thank you so much.
Thank you all very much. And thank you for the excellent questions. And thank you for the work that you're doing in your lives and that you're doing together. This is an example of the power of collective action. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.